Let's make our interaction function here. First, we need to have the input. So in my third person folder, inputs, actions, I'm going to go ahead and create a new input action. This would be IA underscore interact. Save all. And now in my IMC default, I'm going to go ahead and add in a new mapping. And this would be for our IA interact. And I'm going to set this to the F key and then save it. Now in our third person, I'm going to go ahead and search for IA underscore interact. And this is going to give me my interact. Now that we have our input, when the player presses the input, we want to draw a line from the player's camera towards the item that is in front of the player. And if that line hits a item, then we want to be able to communicate with that item. We want to check what that item is and also be able to communicate with it. So let me show you how you can draw a line. To draw a line from the player, you just need to drag off of this and say line trace by channel. Now this line trace just simply creates a line from whichever your starting location is and your end to your end location, and it will just output anything and everything that it hits. And this output is actually really good because if I go ahead and hit the break result, you can see the location where it was hit, and then also the impact point where it was hit, the actor, the component. You can even check for specific bone names. That's very useful for us to use whenever we draw a line. So whenever we get this hit result, what we want to do for now is to print out what are we actually hitting. And we'll actually just set this to the hit actor, which will then get the display name of the hit actor, and it will just print it. I'm just trying to show you what this line trace does before we actually go and fully flesh out this function. We need to give the line trace a starting point and also an ending point. So let's move this back a little. Now for the start, it's pretty straightforward. You just got to get your player camera manager. This is your camera manager, and we're going to say get location. It's going to get you get actor location, and then set this to your start. Done. So the starting point of this line is going to start at the camera location. Now the end point, this is where when the line draws, we want to specify where you want the line to end. We want the line to end like 1,000 units in front of the starting point. And also we only want the line to be drawn on the forward angle. We don't want the line to go to the left, right, or anything like that. We just want to go on the forward angle wherever the player is looking at. To do that, let's get our forward angle. So that would be get actor forward vector, and then we want to now multiply this so we can actually specify to make a line 1,000 units long. When you insert a multiply node, it's going to give you multiply by a vector by another vector, but we can actually change this. We can right click on this vector node and we can change this to a float. So now we can specify that I want my line to be 1,000 units long. I want to make sure that it gets added to the starting location, so it draws a straight line from the starting location 1,000 units forward, and this will be my end. For us to see in game, the draw debug type, we're going to set this to for duration. Compile, and let's go ahead and press play. And now if I press F and I move out of the way, you see this red line, that's where our camera is, and that's our 1,000 units at the front. So anytime I press F, it's going to draw a line in front of where the player is looking at. You see, as I lift the camera up, the line is going to go further out. Whatever we hit on our path, we're going to get a result. If you look on the top left, it's going to tell us that this is a cube, this is a cube, this is a cube, that's a cylinder, and this is another cube, right? So here's the thing. When I press the F, I don't really care if I'm hitting like the cube or a tree or the ground. Like, I don't really want to know. That's too much resources being wasted. I only want to know if that is an item that I can pick up or interact with. The reason why you're able to pick up on everything in the world is because of this trace channel set to visibility. Every static mesh and every world actors are going to come with this visibility as a default with the Unreal Engine. And this is why you're seeing the world being reported back as this is what we're hitting. We're going to use this to our advantage, and we're going to go ahead and set up a new trace channel. Whenever we press F, if it is not an interactable item, then the line trace is not going to give us it's not going to go ahead and analyze what is it, when is it, how is it, and all of that information and not waste any resources. It will only communicate, or it will only give us this hit result if we hit something that has a proper trace channel. So let's go ahead and set up a new trace channel. We're going to go ahead and click Edit, Project Settings. Here, search for Trace Channel, and we're going to create a new trace channel. And this new trace channel, we're going to name this as Interact, and then set this default response to Ignore. The reason why we're setting our default response to Ignore is we want to ignore everything else. We only want our line trace to be the one to communicate with this Interact, and we want to control who this new trace channel is going to be working with. Let's go ahead and press Accept, and you have your Interact. Now let's go ahead and close this. I'm going to refresh this node really quickly. And this trace channel, I have the new Interact trace channel here. So I'm going to go ahead and select as Interact. Now, if I go ahead and if I press play, if I press F, you see how the trace channel is going right through the ground and it's no longer hitting the ground anymore, and it's not processing that ground information anymore, which is good. Now we just save some resources. And one thing that we do want to do is, although ignore self is set up as true, I do want to make sure that the character itself does not get picked up. So I'm going to drag off of this actors to ignore, and I'm going to say make array. And I'm going to say get player character, which is us. And I'm going to plug this into this make array. So we ignore ourselves. And then let's go ahead and select all of this line trace by channel. I can actually delete this for now. Line trace by channel, and then right click, and then I'm going to go ahead and collapse node. And this I'm going to say create line trace. Open this up, and where you have the output, I'm going to drag this out hit and connect it to this output, and then also the return value, I'm going to connect it to this output. So back in our event graph, off of our create line trace, I have my out hit and also the return value. So while having the entire function collapsed, I can still see what am I hitting and did we hit something. Now let's go ahead and make our weapon blueprint so we can actually interact with it. In our core folder, weapon system, I'm going to right click and create a new folder, and this would be for blueprints. Open this up and create a new blueprint class, and this would be of type actor. We're going to name this BP underscore weapon underscore base, and then save all. The reason why we're creating a base blueprint is because there are going to be some functions that all of the weapons are going to share, and there are going to be unique functions that the weapons are not going to share. So if I create a base class, then I can have common functions stored in this base, and then I can create a child. I can create a child blueprint class and then have specific functions on those child. So in our weapon base, I'm going to go ahead and create a new variable, and this would be weapons info. Let's make this type weapon. This is the S weapons info structure that we have. Let's make sure that we make this instance editable and also expose on spawn. Compile and save. I'm going to go ahead and create a scene, add a scene here. This is just an empty scene. I'm going to drag it and drop it onto this default scene root, and that'll get rid of that little icon. Now here we want to add our weapon mesh. It could be either skeletal mesh or static mesh. Either one works, whichever one you have in your game. I'm going to add in the skeletal mesh and then compile, and then also selecting the skeletal mesh, I also want to add in a sphere collision. This collision is what our line trace that we previously created is going to communicate with. So this I'm going to rename to collision. Select the collision, and on the right side, if you scroll down, you should see the collision options here. Where you have the collision preset set to overlap all dynamic, we're going to change this to custom. And as you can see, our new interact trace response is here, and it's set to ignore to begin with. We're going to go ahead and click on block. So this way, whenever we press F and the line gets created, when it hits this sphere, the line is going to just stop. It's not going to go through it. I'm going to make sure that this hidden in game is unchecked, so I kind of can see how it looks like. So to make sure that we actually can communicate with this, I'm going to go back to my third person character. I'm going to move this out a little bit and then drag this out hit, and let's go ahead and break the hit result. And the hit actor, I'm going to connect this display name. I'm going to go ahead and add this to our map to do a test. So let's go to our content drawer, drag and drop this into the map or the world just like this. And if I press F, and if I hit it, while looking at the actual sphere, I can see that the weapon base is actually being picked up by the line trace. And now that our line trace is working well, the last thing that we're going to do here is to communicate with this weapon blueprint and then tell it to add to our inventory. But to do that, we're not going to do any type of casting. We're going to speak to this weapon blueprint directly from our interface. So in our core folder, let's go ahead and create a new folder. And this would be named interfaces. Open this up, and then we're going to right click and then go under blueprint, and you should see blueprint interface. Now I have made a video in my channel already explaining what a blueprint interface does compared to casting. If you have no idea what an interface is, I recommend you going to the channel to watching that informative guide on what an interface is. Now in our interface, we're going to name this as BPI underscore interact. Now we're going to have multiple different interfaces that we're going to utilize in this game. So for the interact function, I want to have a separate interface. Open the interface up, and here for our new function, we're just going to name this as interact. Now compile and save. And in our third person character, we no longer need this print string anymore. Now we only want to send an interface message if we hit the actor who has that interact trace channel. And this Boolean, the return value Boolean, that's what it does. It actually gives you a true or false based on what we hit. If we hit something with that specific trace channel, it's going to give you a true. So we're going to do a branch here. And then connect it here as such. And then we're going to drag our hit actor. And we're going to search for interact now. And then you can see that there is an interact with the message. And this is what you want to select if you want to send out an interface message. The reason why you wouldn't get a message is because your target is not properly defined. Again, in the interface video that I made in my channel recently, I do explain what type of targets you can actually use. So I recommend highly to go and watch that video if you still want to refresh yourself on interfaces. Now we can go ahead and close off this break hit result. And this is all we're going to do at this time. In our weapon base, we're going to go to our class settings. Under implemented interfaces, let's go ahead and implement the new BPI underscore interact interface. Now we have this interfaces added to our BP weapon base. So I'm going to right click and implement this interface. When this event fires, we want to now add this item to our player's backpack. And I'm going to communicate the information of this item to the player, and then the player will then add it to the backpack. So back in our BPI interact, I'm going to add in a new function, and this would be add weapon to backpack. This is going to have an input, and this would be s weapon info, and of type s underscore weapons info. Compile and then save it. Now back in our weapon base, I'm going to go ahead and get my player character, drag off of this player character, and I'm going to search for add weapon to backpack. Plug this in here as such, and then also this s weapons info, we're going to plug it in here. Now I need to implement this add weapon to backpack function in my player. I'm going to go to my third person character and then go to my class settings. Under implemented interfaces, I'm going to search for BPI underscore interact and implement that. And now here in the interfaces, I do have the new function named add weapon to backpack. Go ahead and implement this event. And here I'm going to drag my BPC backpack and search for add to backpack weapons and then plug this in here as such. Now this is good. But we haven't really defined what this weapon is that we're trying to add, and this is where the child class comes in. I'm going to go to the content drawer where we have all of our blueprints. I'm going to right click on this weapon base and I'm going to create a child class. And this will be named BP underscore AR4. Open this up. Under event begin play, we're going to go ahead and drag and say get data table row. And this would be from our weapons info, and then set this to assault 01. Under variables, we don't really see the variables that we got from that we have set up in our weapon base. To do that, we just need to go to our settings here, and then where it says show inherited variables, just select that. And then now you should see those variables here. Drag the weapons info on row found, and this will do a set, and then just connect this out row here, just like this. Compile and save. And also for visual sake, I'm going to select the skeletal mesh and set this to AR4, just like that, and compile. Now when I go ahead and press play in game, I see the AR4, and if I press tab, there's nothing in my inventory, so the inventory doesn't really show up. Now if I go ahead and press F on this AR4, just like that, and now if I press tab, I see the AR4 in my inventory. And then now if I close the inventory and press the AR4 like maybe a couple more times, you should see the AR4 getting added to my inventory. So that looks pretty good. And that's it for our interact function.